Tonight, we begin with a development that federal officials had anticipated, local activists had feared, and Minneapolis residents had been preparing for since January. A confrontation that unfolded not over weeks or months, but in a matter of hours. Hours that exposed deep fractures in how America handles immigration enforcement. Hours that put a major sanctuary city directly in the crosshairs of federal authority. Hours that brought a 2016 CNN ride-along video roaring back into the national conversation. What ICE did this week crossed a line that Minneapolis city leaders had hoped would hold. And when that line broke, the community did not hesitate. They responded with protests, legal challenges, and a level of organized resistance that federal authorities had not fully anticipated. But here's the twist that has everyone talking tonight. A nearly decade-old CNN segment showing ICE operations in action has suddenly become the most shared, most debated, and most controversial piece of footage on the internet. And what it reveals about enforcement tactics then and now is sparking outrage on both sides of the immigration debate. For months now, there had been signals, not official White House announcements, not formal DHS press releases, just signals that ICE was preparing something unprecedented in sanctuary cities. The Trump administration has been aggressive, yes, but they have been calculated in their aggression. Their moves have followed a certain pattern, a rhythm, almost a choreography designed to maximize both enforcement and political impact. But what set off alarm bells in Minneapolis this week was that the pattern went silent. Immigration attorneys who monitor ICE activity know the indicators. The uptick in surveillance vehicles near known immigrant communities, the unusual requests for local law enforcement cooperation, the sudden appearance of unmarked federal vehicles, the quiet redeployment of agents from other regions, all of that went quiet. And whenever ICE goes quiet, it means something is about to get loud. Minneapolis, a city that has prided itself on its sanctuary policies since 2003, was about to become ground zero for a new chapter in America's immigration enforcement saga. And a forgotten CNN video from 2016 was about to remind everyone exactly what these operations look like from the inside. Early Tuesday morning, community watchdog groups detected what they described as coordinated federal vehicle movements, including tactical units that had not been deployed in the Twin Cities in over 8 years. These are the kinds of resources that ICE only deploys when they are signaling something very specific. A major enforcement sweep, a high-profile arrest operation, or a direct challenge to local sanctuary policies. Observers didn't know which category this fell into or whether it fell into all three at once. But what they did know was that the federal government was changing its posture toward Minneapolis. And when immigration enforcement shifts posture without explanation, even by small measures, civil rights organizations pay attention. Then the 2016 CNN video resurfaced. The footage, originally aired as a straightforward ride-along segment, showed CNN cameras embedded with ICE agents during enforcement operations. At the time, it was presented as journalism, a window into how immigration enforcement actually works. But viewed through 2025 eyes, it became something else entirely. Critics saw intimidation tactics, supporters saw professionalism, and everyone saw a preview of exactly what Minneapolis might be facing. The statement issued by Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey tonight was not normal. It was not routine. It was not symbolic. It was urgent. City officials, after emergency meetings, described federal actions as provocative, unconstitutional, and perhaps most importantly, deliberately designed to intimidate immigrant communities into silence. But intimidation only works if the target hesitates. Minneapolis did not. In fact, the city's response was among the most coordinated we've seen in the sanctuary city movement. Here's what we know. Within hours of the first reported ICE activity, community organizations activated rapid response networks. These weren't the informal phone trees of years past. These were sophisticated alert systems, legal observers, know your rights teams, and documentation squads that sanctuary advocates only deploy when they are preparing to challenge federal authority directly. Immigration attorneys flooded into community centers. Churches opened their doors as emergency shelters. And the 2016 CNN footage became a training video showing communities exactly what to expect and how to respond. Tonight, multiple sources confirmed that ICE launched operations targeting at least 12 locations across Minneapolis, including a community center that had recently been designated as a sensitive location under previous administration guidelines. Federal agents moved before local officials could coordinate legal responses. They hit residential neighborhoods. They hit workplace locations. They hit gathering places that were likely preparing to offer sanctuary. In other words, ICE targeted the infrastructure of immigrant community life, the gathering places that would have made organized resistance possible. This is what made the resurfacing of the 2016 CNN video so significant. That footage wasn't just historical, it was instructional. It represented the kind of template that communities could study to understand federal tactics. And Minneapolis, understanding that fully, responded with organization. Not recklessly, not impulsively, but strategically. They didn't confront agents directly. They didn't encourage dangerous standoffs. They documented everything. They flooded social media with real-time updates. They made sure the whole country was watching. And here's where the story becomes even more significant. Immigration policy experts now believe that the administration's Minneapolis operation was designed to test the resilience of sanctuary city infrastructure after years of limited federal enforcement. The federal government wanted to see whether Minneapolis would back down. But instead, the opposite happened. Community organizations didn't scatter. They mobilized with a speed that was so coordinated, so disciplined, that even federal officials noticed. You don't get Washington's attention easily. But this week, Minneapolis did. Former DHS officials speaking with media outlets under anonymity described the administration's approach as pressure testing, a way to identify which sanctuary cities would fold and which would fight. But Minneapolis proved today that they remain both defiant and organized. Their response networks were not only activated, they were synchronized so precisely that legal observers arrived at locations within minutes of reported ICE activity. That coordination matters because it shows months of preparation. It shows that Minneapolis is not waiting to be protected. They are protecting themselves. And the 2016 CNN video, once forgotten, became the catalyst for a new wave of activism. As reports continued coming in throughout the week, we learned more about the scale of community response. Legal aid organizations carried out emergency warrant workshops, reaching thousands of residents within 48 hours. Faith communities targeted by federal attention opened additional sanctuary spaces that had been prepared in the last several months. Activist networks operating across the Twin Cities reportedly shared the 2016 CNN footage as evidence of what enforcement looks like in practice. This wasn't just protest. This wasn't just resistance. This was infrastructure. This was movement building. And movement building is the one thing that federal enforcement has struggled to counter since the sanctuary city movement began. For every enforcement action they have made, communities have countered with something that makes the next action harder. The 2016 video, intended as neutral journalism, had become a resistance manual. Remember, the administration thought Minneapolis would be an easy target. They thought sanctuary city policies would collapse under federal pressure. They thought communities would prioritize fear over solidarity. But tonight, the exact opposite is happening. Minneapolis is organized. Minneapolis is documented. Minneapolis is fighting back in ways that are forcing federal officials to recalculate. The 2016 CNN ride-along, filmed during the Obama administration, has become a symbol of how much and how little has changed. The tactics shown in that footage look remarkably similar to what communities are experiencing today. And that continuity is fueling a conversation about immigration enforcement that transcends any single administration. What makes this moment so consequential and so dangerous is that the Minneapolis operation happened at a time when the administration is under significant political pressure. Immigration hardliners want more aggressive enforcement. Moderate Republicans want visible results without controversy. Business communities want stable workforces, and civil rights organizations want accountability. Federal officials are balancing these demands while facing unprecedented organized resistance. And when governments in that position make sudden moves, they're not doing it from strength. They're doing it from pressure. They're doing it from vulnerability. The resurfacing of the 2016 CNN video added another layer of complexity. Suddenly, the public had reference footage showing exactly the Department of Homeland Security's statement, now circulating widely, was designed to signal that the federal government is not willing to tolerate sanctuary city defiance. Officials said plainly that Minneapolis's policies were inconsistent with federal law enforcement priorities. That is diplomatic language for "we will come for you whether your city cooperates or not." You don't usually hear that tone from DHS unless something serious is at stake. Meanwhile, Minnesota's congressional delegation is demanding answers about whether the operations violated sensitive location guidelines and civil rights protections. Meanwhile, Minneapolis community leaders addressed residents in a powerful, defiant gathering tonight. They said, "We have faced this before and we will face it again." They said, "Our neighbors are not criminals. They are community members." And they said, "No video, no enforcement action, and no federal pressure will make us abandon our values." These are not rhetorical flourishes. These are statements from a community that understands just how high the stakes have become. Here's what makes the situation even more concerning. Minneapolis wasn't isolated. Along with the Twin Cities operations, Denver also reported increased ICE activity near immigrant neighborhoods. Chicago experienced similar surveillance patterns. And Los Angeles increased legal rapid response deployments targeting sensitive community areas. All of this happened within the same 72 hours. When the federal government moves multiple pieces at once, it means something larger is underway. Analysts are now considering several possibilities. One is that the administration is preparing a sustained nationwide sanctuary city pressure campaign. Another is that officials are attempting to create legal test cases that could weaken sanctuary protections. A third possibility, the one worrying advocates the most, is that enforcement agencies are attempting to overwhelm community response networks through simultaneous operations. But this week, Minneapolis took that card off the table. They didn't wait to be overwhelmed. They didn't panic. They didn't abandon their neighbors. They organized faster than federal operations could expand. What we're watching now is a test of democratic resilience. The federal government wants to see whether sanctuary cities will maintain their policies under direct pressure. Minneapolis wants to show that community solidarity is stronger than enforcement fear. Civil rights organizations want to prevent constitutional violations, and the administration wants to prevent sanctuary policies from spreading further. Tonight, we've heard from immigration attorneys who are now monitoring detention facilities across the region. They say legal challenges are being prepared at unprecedented speed. They say community response exceeded anything they've seen in years. And they say the decision to resurface the 2016 CNN video was likely unintended, but its impact has been extraordinary. That footage, intended as journalism, became education. Minneapolis is not backing down. In fact, Minneapolis is doubling down. Their response this week, organized, disciplined, and documented, sent a message to federal authorities that these communities are prepared. And it sent a message to sanctuary cities nationwide that resistance is possible. As the week goes on, we expect more details to emerge about what exactly the administration hoped to achieve. But what we do know is that Minneapolis's preparation was timely. It protected vulnerable community members. It documented potential civil rights concerns, and it demonstrated that sanctuary policies have grassroots infrastructure behind them. What happens next will depend on what federal officials do in the next several weeks. If they escalate, this moment will be remembered as the beginning of a major confrontation. If they recalculate, Minneapolis has already shown they are ready for either outcome. They have shown they are ready to respond. And tonight, for the first time in months, federal enforcement officials appear to be reassessing Washington is quiet, too quiet. And when the administration is quiet, it means they are planning. It means they are choosing their next move carefully. Because this week, they learned something they perhaps already knew. Sanctuary cities are organized. Communities are prepared. And a forgotten CNN video from 2016 just became the most important immigration footage in America. This story is far from over. But tonight, one thing is clear. Minneapolis stood firm. The 2016 footage changed the conversation. And the nation is watching what happens next. And we will be here covering every detail as the next phase unfolds.